The oak-paneled seminar room at Oxford University held 30 of the brightest minds in Europe. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, Oxford's most celebrated comparative literature professor, stood at the head of the mahogany table, presenting what she called the hierarchy of literary languages. "When we examine the great works of human civilization," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years of scholarship, "we see a clear pattern: Greek philosophy, Roman law, French poetry, English drama. These languages created the foundation of intellectual thought because they possess something others lack: linguistic precision for abstract reasoning." The graduate students scribbled notes furiously. Dr. Whitmore was a legend: 2 books, 5 honorary doctorates, a commander of the British Empire. When she spoke, you listened. "This is why," she continued, "the greatest works of philosophy, science, and literature emerged from European languages. They have the grammatical infrastructure for complex thought." Then a voice came from the corner of the room. Soft, careful, but clear. "Dr. Whitmore, what about Tagalog?" The room went silent. Then came the laughter. Not cruel exactly. More like surprised amusement. Tagalog. A language from a former colony being compared to the tongues of empire. Dr. Whitmore's expression was patient, almost kind. "Miss Santos. Isabella Santos. I appreciate cultural pride. Truly I do. Tagalog is perfectly adequate for everyday communication. But we're discussing languages capable of expressing philosophical abstractions, scientific precision, literary artistry at the highest level. Surely you can see the difference." More chuckles around the table. Isabella felt her face burn. She was the only Filipino in the program. The only one from Southeast Asia at all. One student across from her offered a sympathetic smile that somehow made it worse. "Perhaps," Dr. Whitmore said gently, "we can discuss this during office hours if you'd like to explore the topic further." It was a dismissal. Polite, professorial, absolute. Isabella closed her notebook. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply sat there as the seminar continued, as Dr. Whitmore moved on to comparing French symbolism to German expressionism, as everyone forgot her question entirely. But Isabella knew something they didn't. For the past 4 years, she had been translating pre-colonial Filipino poetry. Baybayin texts from the 1500s, ancient Tagalog philosophical treatises that predated Spanish conquest, epic poems that most scholars assumed didn't exist. She had discovered something extraordinary. Something that would shatter Dr. Whitmore's entire framework. Something that would force Oxford itself to rewrite its understanding of linguistic capability. That night, Isabella opened her research files. 4 years of work. Thousands of translated verses. Manuscripts she'd hunted down in Manila archives. Digitized fragments from museum collections. Oral traditions she'd recorded from elders in remote provinces. She began compiling everything into a single document. Not angry, not defensive. Just evidence. Pure, undeniable evidence. The document's title, Abstract Reasoning in Pre-Colonial Tagalog, a comparative analysis of philosophical expression in 16th century baybayin texts and contemporary European philosophy. For 3 weeks, Isabella worked in silence. Her flatmates thought she was preparing for exams. Her professors thought she'd gone quiet after the seminar incident. No one knew what she was building. Then she did something audacious. She sent her complete research, 127 pages of translated texts, linguistic analysis, and comparative philosophy, to 7 of the world's leading experts in Southeast Asian studies, colonial linguistics, and pre-modern philosophy. Within 48 hours, the responses started arriving. Dr. Mei Lin Chen, Cambridge. "This is revolutionary. These texts demonstrate sophisticated epistemological reasoning that rivals Descartes." Professor Andreas Müller, Heidelberg University. "I've studied colonial linguistics for 30 years. This evidence completely contradicts the narrative we've been teaching." Dr. Priya Rajaram, University of Mumbai. "The metaphysical concepts in these Tagalog texts predate similar European formulations by decades. This changes everything." By the end of the week, Isabella's research was being circulated among the world's top linguistic anthropologists. Discussion boards exploded. Academic Twitter was on fire. Someone had found proof that sophisticated philosophical reasoning in Tagalog existed long before colonization, expressed with precision and elegance that matched any European language. Dr. Whitmore received the research on a Thursday morning. Someone had forwarded it with the note, "Thought you should see this. It's from your student." She read it during her morning tea. Then she read it again. Then she canceled her afternoon lecture and read it a third time. This time with her annotations, checking every source, every translation, every claim. At 6 p.m., she called Isabella's college phone. When she answered, her voice was different from the seminar room. Quieter, more careful. "Miss Santos, this is Dr. Whitmore. I've read your research, all of it. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" Isabella's heart hammered. "Yes, of course. 9 o'clock. And Miss Santos, bring your original sources." The next morning, Isabella walked through Oxford's ancient corridors carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with photocopies, photographs, and printed translations. Dr. Whitmore's office was exactly what you'd expect. Floor-to-ceiling books, Persian rug, portraits of former college masters staring down from oak-paneled walls. She stood when Isabella entered, not sitting, waiting for her to arrive. Standing, as if greeting an equal. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. For a long moment, neither spoke. Dr. Whitmore folded her hands on her desk, looking at her with an expression Isabella couldn't quite read. "I've been a professor at Oxford for 27 years, she began slowly. "I've built my career on comparative literature, on understanding how language shapes thought, on identifying which cultures achieved certain intellectual breakthroughs." She paused, looking down at the printed copy of her research sitting on her desk. "Your work," she continued, "challenges fundamental assumptions I've held for decades, assumptions I've published, assumptions I've taught to hundreds of students." Isabella felt her chest tighten. She wasn't sure if this was leading to praise or disaster. "These texts you've translated," Dr. Whitmore said, tapping the pages, "demonstrate philosophical reasoning about consciousness, causality, and metaphysics that I was taught, that I have taught, only emerged in European Enlightenment thinking." She looked up at her directly. "But your evidence shows these concepts were being explored in Tagalog decades earlier, with comparable sophistication, using linguistic structures I had dismissed as incapable of such abstraction." Dr. Whitmore stood and walked to her window overlooking the quadrangle. "I owe you an apology, Miss Santos, not just for that seminar, but for an entire framework of thinking that positioned European languages as inherently superior. Your research proves that framework is colonial bias masquerading as scholarship." Isabella found her voice. "Dr. Whitmore, I didn't do this research to—" "I know," she interrupted gently, turning back to face her. "You did it because you knew the truth. Because you knew your language carried intellectual traditions that deserved recognition." She returned to her desk and pulled out a letter. "I've already begun the process of response. I'm writing an academic paper acknowledging where my previous work was wrong. I'm also recommending your research for publication in the Journal of Comparative Philosophy, the most prestigious in our field." Isabella stared at her. "You're recommending it?" "More than that. I'm co-signing a letter with Dr. Chen from Cambridge and Professor Muller from Heidelberg. We're proposing a new research initiative, Pre-Colonial Southeast Asian Intellectual Traditions, and we're recommending you to lead it." She handed her the letter. It was one of the strongest academic endorsements she'd ever seen. "There's something else," Dr. Whitmore said. "I'd like you to present your research to the full faculty, not as a student defending a thesis, as a scholar presenting findings that change our discipline." 3 weeks later, Isabella stood in the examination school's building, the same place where Oxford has conducted academic ceremonies for centuries. The room was packed. Faculty members from across the university, graduate students from multiple departments, even 2 professors who had flown in from Cambridge specifically for this presentation. Dr. Whitmore sat in the front row. When Isabella began her presentation, she nodded encouragingly. "For centuries," Isabella began, "we've been told that certain languages, European languages, were uniquely suited for abstract reasoning, for philosophy, for complex intellectual thought. Today, I'm going to show you why that narrative is false." For 90 minutes, she presented her evidence. The baybayin texts, the philosophical concepts, the linguistic structures, the comparative analysis showing that Tagalog possessed every grammatical tool needed for sophisticated abstract reasoning. When she finished, the silence lasted for 3 seconds. Then Dr. Whitmore stood and began clapping. The entire room followed. The standing ovation lasted for 4 minutes. As Isabella left the podium, Dr. Whitmore approached her with something in her expression she'd never seen before. Genuine respect. "Thank you," she said simply, "for having the patience to do the research, for having the courage to challenge me, for changing how we think about language and intellect." Isabella nodded, but she didn't need to say anything. Her work had already spoken. 6 months later, Oxford University made an announcement. The Faculty of Medieval and Modern Languages was establishing a new department, Global Intellectual Traditions. Its purpose was to study philosophical and literary works from non-European languages with the same rigor previously reserved for Greek, Latin, and Western European texts. Isabella Santos, at 27 years old, was appointed as its founding research director. Dr. Whitmore stepped down from her position as department head to work alongside her as senior research fellow. Not out of obligation. Out of genuine interest in learning what she'd missed for decades. Their first project was ambitious. They assembled a team of scholars from around the world to identify and translate philosophical texts from languages that had been dismissed as primitive. Tagalog, yes, but also Nahuatl, Quechua, Sanskrit, Classical Chinese, Arabic, Swahili, and dozens of others. What they discovered transformed the field. Every language had intellectual traditions that reflected the philosophical concerns of its speakers. Every language had developed sophisticated ways to discuss consciousness, causality, ethics, and metaphysics. None was superior. They were simply different expressions of human intellectual genius. Isabella's research was published in 7 major academic journals. She received invitations to speak at Cambridge, the Sorbonne, Yale, and the University of Tokyo. She was nominated for the prestigious Leverhulme Prize for Emerging Scholars. But the moment that meant most to her came during a quiet conversation in Dr. Whitmore's office, now much less imposing than it had seemed that first morning. "I've been thinking about that seminar," Dr. Whitmore said, pouring tea for both of them. "When you asked about Tagalog." Isabella smiled slightly. "I remember being terrified." "You should have been," Dr. Whitmore said. "I was terrible to you. Not intentionally cruel, but dismissive in a way that's perhaps worse. I genuinely believed I was speaking truth." She paused, stirring her tea. "I've been contacted by several academic publishers. They want to create new textbooks for comparative literature that reflect what we've learned. Textbooks that don't position European languages at the center of intellectual history. I told them, I'd only participate if you're the lead author." Isabella looked up, surprised. "Dr. Whitmore, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. But the field needs your voice leading this conversation, not mine. You've earned it." 1 year later, Global Voices, Intellectual Traditions Across Languages and Cultures was published. It became the standard textbook for comparative literature and philosophy programs across Europe and North America. Students learning about philosophical traditions for the first time would now learn what Isabella had discovered: that sophisticated reasoning exists everywhere, expressed beautifully in every language, worthy of serious scholarly attention. The textbook included an entire section on pre-colonial Tagalog philosophy. It featured Isabella's translations of the baybayin texts. It honored Filipino intellectual traditions as what they truly were: sophisticated, profound, and equal to any other. Back in Manila, Isabella's parents received a package. It was a copy of the textbook. On the dedication page, Isabella had written, "To my Lola, who taught me that our language carries the wisdom of our ancestors. To my parents, who never let me forget where I came from. And to every Filipino who was told their language was simple, their culture was backward, their thoughts were less sophisticated. You were lied to. Our ancestors were philosophers. Our language is profound. Our intellectual traditions deserve to be studied, celebrated, and honored." Her mother cried reading those words. Her father called her immediately, voice shaking with pride. That same year, the British Academy awarded Isabella their Rising Star Fellowship, the highest honor for scholars under 35. When she gave her acceptance speech, she looked out at an audience of Britain's most distinguished academics. "We tell stories about intelligence," she began. "We tell stories about which cultures produced great thinkers, and which didn't. We tell stories about which languages can express complex ideas and which can't. These stories shape how we see the world. They shape whose thoughts we take seriously. She paused, looking directly at the camera broadcasting the ceremony globally. But those stories are wrong. They're not based on evidence. They're based on empire, on colonization, on the assumption that European equals advanced. My research challenges those stories. It presents evidence. It shows that every language, every culture, has solved the puzzle of human understanding in ways worth studying and respecting. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Later that evening, Isabella received an email from Dr. Whitmore. The subject line simply read, "Your Lola would be proud." The message: you didn't just prove Tagalog was sophisticated. You changed how we think about intelligence itself, about whose ideas count, about what knowledge looks like. That takes more than brilliance. It takes integrity. Thank you for teaching me to see what I'd been missing. Isabella sat back in her flat, looking at the email. She thought about that day in the seminar room when everyone laughed at her question. She thought about the humiliation, the doubt, the moment when she could have accepted their dismissal and stayed quiet. But she hadn't. Instead, she had done the work. She had trusted her knowledge. She had challenged the authority. She had changed Oxford's understanding of human intellect. Her accent hadn't changed. But now, the entire world was listening.